Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, so very special welcome to everybody to another EBFA webinar. If this is your first time tuning in, very special welcome. And if you are returning and kind of a frequent visitor of the EBFA webinars, very special welcome to you as well. If this is your first time tuning in, my name is Dr. Emily Splickle. I am a podiatrist and the founder of EBFA, which is an education company built around from the ground up programming, which is education on the foot and ankle, barefoot science, and gait assessment. So every first Thursday of every month, we do a special webinar, and we bring in some guest educators, just like tonight. And all of these are recorded and archived. They can be viewed on our website or on the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/EBFA Fitness. So the way that it's going to go is we're going to have roughly 30 minutes of a educational webinar, followed by roughly 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So if you have any questions, just kind of keep them or write them down, and then our guest educator is going to review those. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Mr. Cody Sipe. Welcome, Cody.
Well, thank you very much.
So Cody is one of the co-founders of Functional Aging Institute. He's also a PhD in health and kinesiology, so he's very smart. And he's an adjunct professor or an associate professor at Harding University. So Dr. Sipe is going to go over the science of functional aging for mature adults, and he's going to talk a little bit about his certification, which is based from his company, Functional Aging Institute. So, Cody, the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you. And first off, thank you, Dr. Emily, for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate it. It's something I really enjoy doing. You know, I teach all the time at a university and speak at conferences, and I just really enjoy it. And so I appreciate you inviting me to do this. And I think it's really important information. I'm really excited about it. And thank you to all you attendees for taking the time out of your schedule to learn this information. I really hope it's valuable to you. And definitely, you know, there's no way that I'm going to be able to really address all of your, you know, questions or concerns during the presentation. So be sure to submit your questions, and we'll address those as best as we can. A little bit kind of about my background. The Functional Aging Institute was founded last year. It's just getting off the ground, and I started it with my business partner, Dan Ritchie. He's also PhD trained and is, excitingly enough, was named the 2014 Personal Trainer of the Year by PFP Magazine. So really excited for him, and it's very well deserved for him. I teach at the university, but Dan runs our fitness facility that we own together, and it's a facility that is focused on personal and small group training for the 50-plus clientele. So that really is our bread and butter. We have built our whole training business around serving that market. And so this is very important information to us. You know, we want to be sure that we are hitting the mark when it comes to training our mature clients to improve function. And so it's something that we take an academic perspective about, but also a very practical perspective about. Here's what's really driving all of this. If you look at this graph, you see the explosion in the older adult population here in the U.S. and worldwide. This is not just the U.S. that's going through this. The baby boom population it's a global phenomenon. And so you see, if you take a look at the oval that I highlighted there, 2010 really started this huge upswing as the baby boomers started to turn 65. And the exciting thing for us as fitness professionals and as an industry is that, you know, we've got 30 to 40 years of continued growth in this population. So I try to sell this as job security for trainers. You know, if you really want to say, what am I going to stake my career on? What's going to be around for the next 30 to 40 years? It's going to be the mature adult population. So this huge growth means there's huge potential for you as a trainer, whether you are making a living off of training people, or you are serving people through a community organization or through a nonprofit foundation of some sort. there's a huge potential, and there's also really huge need. So this information to me is really right on the money as far as where the industry is going. So when we look at this older population, though, there's some really interesting dynamics that you may be hearing about or have heard about or read something in the newspaper, saw some sort of newscast special on the baby boomers and how they're going to change everything. They're going to change retirement. They're going to change what it means to be old. And well, you know what? A lot of that is very true. The baby boomers are really approaching their aging from a very different perspective than what people 20 years ago or even 10 years ago thought about what it means to be older. And so if you look at the kind of the current senior population, the kind of the 75 and older crowd, there's a really big difference as a whole in their mentality and their approach to exercise and fitness and to their own aging than what the boomers are bringing to it. They're going into their older adulthood really with this idea of, I want to live a really long time, and I want to make sure that every day is lived to the fullest. I don't want to get older like my parents did. I don't want to spend time in the rocking chair. I want to be out exploring the world. I want to travel. I want to continue to work. I want to continue to play and do the things that I love to do, spend time with family. And so at the heart of that is there's a message that they're sending us in the fitness industry that says we want to be functional, right? We want to be able to do the stuff that we love to do every single day for as long as possible. And the boomers really think they're going to do it. I mean, they think they're going to be different than their parents were when it comes to getting older. There's a gentleman in Canada who has coined the term Zoomers, and he calls these boomers with zip. And he's really a media mogul, and he recognized that this huge growth in the older adult population was very different than what it had been before. And so kind of look at how he's identified a Zoomer. The body of a 65-year-old, that might seem old to you, but if you're 80 and still can stay 65, that's great. But the mind of a 45-year-old, the libido of a 25-year-old, the heart of a teenager, and then you got all the money. And that is so true. We've got these boomers have this zest for life. They want to stay younger. They don't want to stay necessarily in their 20s, but they want to enjoy life physically, emotionally, socially, and they've got the financial means to do that. And so we see people who we would categorize as Zoomers. And that's become kind of a phrase to refer to this group as a whole. Although not everybody is like that. We recognize there's a lot of diversity that we'll talk about within this population. So not everybody is, super excited to be a Zoomer. But let's take a quick journey through time, and we'll start in the 1970s and take a look at how fitness has changed when it comes to seniors or older adults through those decades. And then by seeing kind of where we've come, we're going to see where we're going. And when we get to the 2000s, I'll also spend some time looking at some specific research, which to me is very enlightening, it's very compelling, and it also has really changed my entire view of approaching exercise for mature populations. So when we look at the 70s, what was happening with exercise in the 70s? Well, when it came to seniors, there was really no exercise. It was very gentle. It was programs like Sit and Be Fit, which was a PBS-based TV program, which is very popular and is actually still around. But it's exercising in a chair, gentle exercise, sittercise, stretchercise, these sorts of very gentle programs for seniors. And that was kind of the prevailing mindset throughout the whole fitness industry as a whole. When we got to the 1980s, in the early 80s, a landmark research study came out and was published by Miriam Nelson, who, if you remember her name, she wrote Strong Women Stay Young and a number of other books. And then Dr. Fiataroni, who is still a very prominent researcher and got married, so now she's Fiataroni Singh. I believe she's down in Australia now, still publishing. But they came out with a landmark study in the early 80s which showed if you did high-intensity strength training with older adults in their 90s and even over 100 years old, right, They took individuals in a nursing home, put them through a high-intensity strength training program. Now, at the time, the kind of idea was you're going to hurt them, you're going to break them, heck, you might kill them, right? They can't do high-intensity strength training. Well, what they found out is that they tolerated it very well, and they improved their strength and muscle mass by 100 and sometimes over 200%. And so this was a very successful program. It really created a shift in how we approached exercise for older adults. And so through the 1980s, the main focus was really on sarcopenia, and that is the loss of muscle mass as we get older. So our whole kind of philosophy was, okay, we need high intensity strength training to build those muscles. And if we build those muscles, we're going to build function. Well, we got to the 1990s, and we still had kind of this mix of some people doing the high intensity strength training, some people doing the easy, gentle strength training. You know, the industry is oftentimes very slow to respond to the research and the changes. And so the 1990s was just kind of a mix of programs. When we hit the 2000s then, much more research started to come out, which made us look at function. Okay, now what are we really trying to accomplish here? You know, is it just about getting bigger muscles? Is that really going to solve everything? And I'm going to look at some of the research that came out through the 2000s, which really shaped my whole view and philosophy of training older adults. And now we hit the 2010s, and what we see in the industry, which you're all very well aware of, is I think we just see confusion. There are so many options now. You know, everybody seems like they want to be the entrepreneur to come out with the next big program, you know, and so we have all these different programs that are out there, you know, from the CrossFits and the Jazzercise and the Silver Sneakers and so many different programs. So the question is, what's really best? And so I think there's confusion as to what mature adults maybe should be doing or what can they be doing. And so let's take a look at some of the specific research that has really helped to kind of shape me, and I think will be very enlightening for you as we look at the research related to functional aging. In 2001, a study by Keyser and Jetty came out. And Keyser and Jetty are two very prominent researchers for older adults, and they focus on a lot of rehabilitation, but also on fitness and function as well. And they did a review of 31 different studies. And what they were looking at is to see, all right, well, what kind of impact does exercise really have on function for older adults that participate in these different kinds of programs? So they reviewed 31 studies, and the studies varied from strength training studies to flexibility to cardio studies to combined programs. Lots of different programs were thrown into the mix. And they wanted to look at the outcomes on several different levels. One is called the impairment level. On that level, that's things like strength, range of motion, aerobic capacity, the things that kind of as a fitness profession we typically test and measure and we're very comfortable with. But then they also looked at functional measures, which are becoming more prominent today, and I'm thankful to say that I think more and more fitness professionals are performing functional measurements now than probably ever before. But these could be things like gait speed, chair rise time, or number of balance tests or step tests, etc. And then they also looked at disability. What they found was that at the impairment level, so if you said, okay, there's a program of strength training designed to improve strength. Did it work? Yes, it worked. If you put an older adult on a strength training program, they get stronger. If you put an older adult on an aerobic training program, they improve for cardiovascular areas. And so it works for those specific areas, and nobody really doubts that. But the question is, how does that translate to functional improvements? And what they found was a lot of inconsistency. They found that some studies showed a pretty nice relationship between the impairment level factors and their improvements and the functional level factors, and some studies didn't show much relationship at all. And so a study that would show a weak relationship would be something like, you know, subjects X, Y, and Z improved a great deal on their strength, but then their function didn't improve, right? And so there was inconsistency there in those two different levels that they were looking at. So then this obviously got me thinking. I became very interested in this and started doing some more research. In 2004, another study came out, and this is by Latham and colleagues, which Nancy Latham is also a kind of very prominent researcher in this area. She also did a review of studies, and what she decided was, okay, well, one of the weaknesses of the 2001 Keyser and Jetty study was that they included all sorts of exercise programs, and you and I know that these programs could vary quite a bit on their true effectiveness. So they said, okay, well, what is the best kind of exercise program out there? And that would be progressive resistance training. They said, okay, we are only going to look at studies that were randomized controlled trials, so very highly controlled, very reliable studies, using the best intervention that we knew at the time, which is progressive resistance training, with older subjects, age 60 or more. And again, they wanted to look at those impairment level factors and those functional level factors. So again, they found large positive effect on muscular strength. You put someone over the age of 60 on a strength training program, you're going to improve their strength significantly. Okay, that's kind of a slam dunk. But then they found out that the effect on function was only small to moderate, depending on the study. And they made the comment, and this is what's very interesting, they concluded that strength gains do not always equate to similar functional gains. Meaning, if George participates in a strength training program and gets really strong, that doesn't mean their function is going to improve by the same degree. If they double their strength, will they double their function? Probably not. In fact, some people would improve their strength almost insignificantly, a very small amount, but yet get very large functional gains from that. So again, this started the process thinking, okay, well, is it all then about just getting stronger, on building bigger muscles, on working on combating sarcopenia? Well, then in 2007, a study came out, and this is just one of many that are now looking at what we call multimodal exercise programs. And so these are programs that use progressive resistance training and cardio and balance training all simultaneously. So you're kind of getting the whole package. And so those studies, you would say, okay, if we're going to improve function, these studies are the studies that would do it, right? These are the kinds of interventions that we would use, and are likely the kind of interventions that I would say most of us in the fitness profession would use, right? We wouldn't just do one thing. We would perform resistance training with our older clients, but also we'd have them on a cardio program. We'd do some balance training with them. So this is probably representative of what most trainers, I would say, do with their older clients. And they found, hey, had great benefits for falls prevention, that it really worked having these multimodal programs. But again, the effect on functional outcomes was pretty small. It wasn't really robust. And they specifically identified the measures of habitual gait, maximal gait, which is maximal gait speed, and chair stand time as being functional outcomes. So still not a lot of evidence supporting this kind of isolated approach to resistance training. This progressive resistance training, primarily where you would get on a machine of some sort, weight stack machine, and you would kind of work those individual muscle groups to get them stronger. Well, then in 2011, this is the final study that we'll take a look at. This is the most recent by Keyser and Brems. And they took a look at both clinical trials and systematic reviews that evaluated functional outcomes with either older adults or adults with knee arthritis. They included both of those in there. And if you know anything about adults with knee arthritis, you know that more than likely means an older adult. They have the largest prevalence of osteoarthritis of any other age group. They included about 15 systematic reviews in their review. And so they're looking at a lot of data. If you consider a systematic review, just one includes numbers and numbers of individual studies, and they had 15 systematic reviews that they included. They really had this really broad representation of the research literature. And what they found, again, was rather surprising. Again, they found that, both these groups, when you put them on a certain kind of training program, that aspect responds well to the training. So again, aerobic exercise improves aerobic capacity. Strength training improves strength. In addition, they found that pain goes down with both types of programs, and physical function does improve. But the effects on function are rather modest. And so as they looked at the data, they really could not come to a solid conclusion. They said, it's really not clear whether if these exercise interventions that we're currently using are really going to minimize or prevent disability. So if you lose your function enough, you become disabled, right? So it's just kind of this low level of function that we term disability, and that, our approaches right now really are not working. It doesn't seem to be, and we need some novel approaches to trying to maximize function and reduce risk of disability. Now, they also, when they looked at function, they also looked mainly at things like gait speed and chair stand time. And so as we look at this next model, this is a model of disability that's very famous, very popular. It's not used as much in the necessarily in the fitness industry. I teach about this a lot because I think it's very important that we understand it if we're working with mature adults. But this idea, you see disability on the far end. How does someone get to become disabled? Well, starting at the other end, the model says, well, we usually start with some disease or pathology, or we start with poor lifestyle choices, primarily inactivity. And either of those alone, those two things, obviously play off each other quite a bit, but that could then lead to an impairment. So an impairment are the things like strength, range of motion, aerobic capacity, etc. So as an example, somebody with heart disease would probably lose aerobic capacity because they would be inactive and because of the disease process, right? So we look at arthritis, right? Arthritis, same way. What's going to happen with a person with arthritis? Well, eventually they'll probably become inactive. They have pain, and they don't realize that exercise will help mitigate the pain, and so they become even less active. That creates this kind of downward cycle of inactivity, and so their strength goes down, the range of motion goes down, their aerobic capacity goes down, their body composition worsens, on and on it goes. And so eventually that's going to start to impact a person's function. They can no longer climb stairs like they should, carry groceries, walk long distances, do the kinds of work, play, or recreational activities that they used to be able to do. And so these are all functional limitations, and if those continue to worsen, eventually they need help. They need somebody to take care of them, and that's what we call disability. So in this process, if you look at our traditional approach has been to stack up on these impairment levels, primarily strength, right? Strength, aerobic capacity, flexibility. Those have been the three that in the fitness industry, that's what we hear about, right? We hear those are the things you got to train. That's important. Well, for an older adult, the problem is, and this is the reason why I think so many exercise programs, even though they're beneficial to a certain degree, aren't the great, robust programs that we need to really improve function. The reason is that we're not focusing on enough impairment level factors. We're kind of putting all our eggs in kind of one basket. We're saying, look, if we can just improve strength enough, then function is going to improve. And what we've seen from the research is that doesn't always happen. So consider this. How many impairment level factors could you name that you would say are vital for function? So beyond muscle strength, beyond aerobic capacity, beyond flexibility, what are those impairment level factors that you think are important for function? How many can you come up with? Well, here's my list. Okay, these are impairment level factors that are vital for function. There's a bunch of them. Think about just muscle strength. It's not just about muscle strength, right? Because we have all sorts of different kinds of contractions. When you go through daily movements, you have concentric contraction, eccentric contraction, isometric contraction occurring in different muscle groups all simultaneously. And if you have muscle groups that are crossing two joints, you get these econcentric contractions in which you've got all three happening at the same time in different parts of the muscle. It becomes much more complicated. So just by focusing on concentric strength, like we typically do, doesn't mean we're even going to get to all aspects of strength that are important for function. And then we've got to think about things like power. Power has been highly related to function, even more so than strength, because now it takes in contractile velocity into account. But look at things on the right-hand side, such as proprioception, vestibular control, stability, postural control. All these things are vital and play a role in function, in performing activities. And so we've got to think about then how do we address these in a more global fashion than in the basic programs that we've been giving? Now, with all these different factors, the one thing that's really interesting is they don't all worsen at the same rate for the same individual. And this is one of the big mistakes we've made. Take a look at just muscle strength on the next slide. We see that sarcopenia, okay, the age-related decline in muscle mass. Well, if you look at the graph on the right and you see that straight line that's drawn between those data points, well, if you would kind of take that data and put it together, you'd come up with some sort of average. And we'd say, okay, well, muscle strength declines on average about 30% from age 50 to 70. But look at all those scatter points. All those dots represent an individual. So if you look at the 50-year-olds, right, you have a 50-year-old who it has very low muscle mass, okay, way below that line. You look at an 80-year-old, and they will have a data point above that line, way above the 50-year-old, and all in between. People have a huge variability in how they age that's dependent on lots of different factors. So again, we can't just take this one approach to everyone and say, oh, it's all about sarcopenia. Everybody's going to lose 30% of their muscle mass. That's not so. In fact, I've had 70 and 80-year-olds who come in to work out that would just blow your mind on how strong they are, yet they still have functional impairments. One guy in particular that trained with my business partner, Dan, actually before we had a facility while we were both working at Purdue, but he had Parkinson's disease. And so he had to walk with a cane and he had to shuffle. He was a taller, kind of bigger man, but he could barely walk, and he would walk very slowly, shuffling into our facility and come in the door very gingerly. We would put him on the leg press, and he would max it out without any problem. 450, 500 pounds. I can't remember how much was on it. I mean, he had no problem with muscle strength, but he still couldn't function. So there's a huge variability and diversity within this population. Okay, so now let's kind of take a look at what this means, what this kind of variability means. It means that the older adult population is really the most diverse than any other age group. We have people who are elite athletes and who are still participating in long distance sports and all sorts of things. And we have people that can't even take care of themselves, that are disabled. So we need to have an approach that is appropriate for a large range of function within individuals. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the kind of movement myth. Oh yeah, forgot about it, add this in. This is a way that we've characterized older adults in kind of a very, I'm not going to say generic way, but we've kind of tried to group them together to get our kind of mind around the different levels of function. So at the top left, you see you have the elite athlete. If you follow clockwise around the circle, then you have people that are fit, those that are independent, those that are frail, and those that are dependent. Now, kind of the information I'm talking about today really doesn't hit that dependent age group. That's really kind of a special group that has really lost their function and has multiple comorbid conditions, lots of disease issues. And so other than that, the frail to the elite athlete, these are things that apply to all of them. So now let's look at these movement myths. I will often ask my mature audiences when I speak to them, what is the best exercise for older adults? And everybody always says walking. Walking's the best exercise. You know, it's easy to do. Everybody can do it for the most part. It doesn't require any special equipment or a gym membership, you know. Well, this is one of those myths that you have to address with the older adults themselves, because it's not enough. It's not enough to improve their function. And many studies show there are a lot of great benefits from walking, and gait speed is a key clinical measure that is gaining in popularity that shows, you know, if people get below a certain gait speed, then they are more likely to lose their function, more likely to become disabled and have all sorts of problems. It even predicts the length of their life and their longevity. But walking is certainly not the best exercise. How many impairment level factors will that improve? Well, it'll improve probably one, and that's aerobic capacity. If someone's really weak and they walk uphill, maybe it'll improve strength a little bit. Next myth is kind of the chair or the pool. I get a lot of people who think that older adults need chair exercise. And one of my biggest pet peeves is to go to a retirement village or a fitness center, and this has happened a number of times. I go in to see their exercise class. These mature adults walk in fact, they almost dance in. They're full of life and energy, and they're laughing, they're joking around. They go into this class, and they all sit down for 30 minutes to do their exercise program. That is just not appropriate. Chair-based exercise has been shown to be inferior to standing programs on a number of different levels. Now, several different studies that show that. Now, is chair exercise appropriate at some point? Yes, it is, for sure, and for certain individuals. But it really should be used minimally, only when absolutely necessary for the general population. All right, what about the pool? A lot of people believe that older adults either want to exercise in the pool or they need to. I'm a big fan of aquatic exercise. It has many great benefits, so definitely don't get me wrong about that. However, not all older adults are excited about exercising in the pool or need a pool. I get often asked, when we describe our facility, well, do you have a pool? No, why don't you? Well, because we don't need one. It's just we get so many clients that really have no interest in using the pool at all. Myth 3, intense exercise is dangerous. Again, we are going through kind of this transition where we've seen that high intensity resistance training works, but there's still so many trainers out there who don't want to push their older clients. And I think it's just a lack of knowledge and a lack of comfort with them. I'm fortunate that in my career I've had a lot of training. I've gone through kind of the ACSM exercise specialist certification and the registered clinical exercise physiologist certification. I've kind of devoted my academic, my practical work on older adults. So I don't expect everybody to do that. However, you can really push your older clients to get better. In fact, you have to, right? In order for them to get better, you have to apply progressive overload. But a lot of people are very scared that they're going to hurt them, right? They're going to have a heart attack or they're going to have a stroke. If you've done your job and you've vetted them appropriately and checked their health conditions and gotten approvals if you need to, then there's really no reason not to push them and get them to exercise more intensely than they do. It's pretty funny in our facility. We do the small group personal training, and we'll do some high intensity interval training classes for about 30 minutes. And what's really funny is the older women who come in, because these are women that will typically come in with their hair done well, and they're not really dressed in gym clothes, and typically when they leave, they look exactly the same way. Then they get into this small group training class, and we're making them do these high intensity intervals, and they're like, oh my gosh, I never exercised this hard in my life. And we're like, well, this is how you're supposed to be exercising if you really want to see results. The reason you haven't been getting results is because you've been going too easy. So don't be scared to push them as long as you make sure that they're healthy enough to do it. More strength means better function. I think I've already addressed this. That is not so. Strength is good. I'm not going to say it's not, but more strength doesn't mean more function. So we need to stop focusing just on let's get them on this circuit, do strength training, because that's going to solve their problem. It really isn't. The basics are not enough for them either. So when we look at the multimodal programming, we see, well, they combine cardio and progressive resistance training and balance, but even combining all three of those isn't necessarily going to solve the problem either. It's not going to really maximize function. And that's what I'm focused on. I'm focusing, I don't just want a program that's good, I want a program that maximizes function. And so I want to stay on the kind of cutting edge of all this research that's pointing at different techniques and different strategies that are showing that they are better than traditional strength training or cardiovascular training methods. And the last one is one size fits all. This population is very diverse, and so I get very frustrated by programs that follow kind of a rigid format, because that is not going to be able to capture the diversity of this population. You really do need lots of different variety in the programming structure. This is often difficult for group exercise, because they get people with diverse abilities in one group class, and they're trying to cater to all their needs, and it can be tough and it can be challenging, and I certainly sympathize with that. But that's why that at least in our facility, we've really chosen to either do one-on-one or small group, because in a small group, we can cater to that individual's functional needs in ways that we couldn't do in a large group. So these are kind of some of the top myths. Now, I know that we've kind of reviewed the science, and I've said a lot about what not to do, and I haven't given you any, well, here's what you should do. Well, unfortunately, because we're just reviewing the science of functional aging, I don't have time to go into depth about what you should do. I will say, if you're interested, I would love for you to explore our new certification, the Functional Aging Specialist, because all this philosophy, all this approach that I've talked about has been put into the certification that we've just developed and is just launching at the end of January. It's just going to be coming online, brand new this year. We're really excited about it. It really represents kind of my work and what Dan has done, what other people have done really for kind of the past 20 years. But in the functional aging training model, what we do is we take this three-dimensional approach to training that's very specific to older clients. And so by going through this certification, I think you're going to come out of that with some really great knowledge and skills for working with older adults that's way beyond anything that's currently out there. And trust me, I've looked at pretty much all of them. I've looked at all the, I'm going to say, quote, senior fitness certifications that are out there, all the older adult certifications, and everybody's unfortunately just kind of saying the same thing about dealing with older adults. They're being very basic, they're being very gentle, they're not creating something that's unique. And so when you look at all those impairment level factors, let's take proprioception as an example. Dr. Emily and I have had some good conversations about this. You know, well, is your program or any of these other programs showing you how to train for proprioception and how important that is, and like, believe it or not. So it's a program that can be completed completely online. We have 12 educational modules that you go through. It includes videos, manuals, and audio files, and you take an online exam to complete your certification. We are offering some one-day workshops that go along with the content. And so for this year at least, I don't know what's going to happen next year, but for this year at least, whenever we do a one-day workshop and you sign up for it, you will also get complete access to all the online modules. So the one-day workshop, I know a lot of people like to be right in front of an instructor and a trainer and to walk through it. You know, we're very kind of movement-oriented professionals, and so we want to kind of be there and go through it. And I understand that, so we're trying to offer a lot of workshops in different areas. In addition, I'd like to encourage all of you to go to the website because you're going to get a free functional training starter kit. And all you have to do is just go to the website, functionalaginginstitute.com, and you'll be able to download that for free. And it's a good insight into some of the information that we include in the Functional Aging Specialist certification, but also will give you some great practical advice that I haven't been able to get to here in this particular presentation. So please check that out. Kind of to end, before we start taking questions, I just want to say, you know, if you're out there working with mature adults, I think you understand what I'm talking about. I mean, you see that they have a lot of different functional needs that really aren't addressed by some of your standard typical approaches. The same thing you do with a younger adult doesn't necessarily work with an older adult. And even a lot of mature adults can do some of the same stuff. Like a mature adult, if they're fit, could go to CrossFit. They could do that type of exercise. But we just want to back up and say, well, should they? You know, is that going to be optimal for them to improve their function? So I encourage you to keep educating yourself in this area.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Sipe. I thought that was incredible, and you made some very powerful points. I especially like that slide that you had shown with the different variables that you can actually measure. Where a lot of people think of strength primarily just in that concentric phase, but I like that you had said, you know, are we measuring their eccentric control, which we know is critical to functional movement because that's how you're really controlling impact forces, etc.
Yeah.
So I really like that. And if anyone has any questions for Dr. Sipe, they can type them in and we'll go through those. And if you have any questions that you think of after maybe watching it again or sleeping on it or looking at the website for this starter kit, Dr. Sipe, did you want to make your email available? Or do you have a
sure. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
It is srfitsolutions@yahoo.com. So that's SRF as in Frank, IT solutions@yahoo.com.
Okay, excellent. So I know sometimes people sleep a little bit on it, or um, if they do go to your website and download this kit. So
Yep, and I apologize. I should have put that on the slide. I just forgot about
no, that's
it.
fine. That's fine. So as people are kind of thinking, if they do have any questions, I do have a question for you, which I often encourage when I have patients who are, I guess, would fall under the baby boomer sector, and they're um, going through the physical therapy, etc. Is how much do you encourage amino acid use, specifically L-leucine, in your mature adult population? Just because a lot of the research that I read was that sarcopenia and doing resistance training and the prevention of sarcopenia is that as we age, we actually lose that amino acid for building actual protein to build muscle. So I was just a
Yeah,
little.
that's a really good question. We don't encourage it a lot right now, and one of the reasons is simply because we have tried to stay in the kind of camp of no supplements.
Okay.
Have for kind of in our facility at least, but we do tell people about it, and we do talk about it a little bit, but we're not out there really encouraging its use. But it's interesting you ask it now because Dan and I have had these same conversations. When we see the data on amino acid supplementation and its benefits, then we are seriously considering then adding that kind of to our normal profile of individuals and encouraging that in our facility. I'm also working with some researchers down at the University of Arkansas Medical School in their geriatric department, and a couple of them have a lot of expertise in protein supplementation, and they're looking at developing some specific formulas that they've used in their research. So I'm also considering using that in our facility as well and seeing what kind of benefits it gives people.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. I know the research is very interesting in that sector.
It
Um,
is, yeah.
Kind of that applying the bodybuilding concepts, but in a little bit different approach. So, have a question. You talk about boosting intensity, but many of my senior clients think this is biggest loser and that they have to throw up to get the benefit. So, I think the question is how intense is intense when you're working with the senior fitness for it to fall under
Wow.
intense.
Yeah, I wonder if that's kind of a boot camp environment or something. Yeah, well, when it comes to intensity, if you're talking about cardiovascular intensity, the same guidelines really exist as the younger population. You don't have to get to the point of throwing up to get a good result. You want to get to that high intensity range. Now, you can use heart rate as a guideline, if you want, but heart rate variability in older adults is greater. And so I really like to use just rating of perceived exertion. And if they're getting up to that very hard exertion level, if they're getting up in their intense intervals up to a 17 or 18, well, that's plenty, right? There's no need to max yourself out at 20. And most of the times they're going to get up probably more in the 16 to 17 range on those intervals before coming back down and doing some recovery and then going back up. So it's the same kind of guidelines exist if they're healthy, right? And that's getting them up to those higher intensity levels and then back down to moderate intensity levels. But definitely they don't need to be throwing up. And so I think that's an issue that you need to address with them, because one of the challenges with the aging process is longer recovery time. And so if they're doing that consistently, then we're not going to use the term overtraining, but what's going to happen is their results are going to be impaired if they're constantly doing that and they're not nutritionally getting what they need, if they're not getting enough sleep and not getting enough rest period in between. So I would encourage them to back off that a little bit.
Okay, great. Another question is, and this is uh, totally appropriate for us and based off of what we were talking about collaborations between us, is what is one of the best ways to start training proprioception?
Yeah, that's a great question. For proprioception, you've got to think about mobility, right? So it's all about getting up and moving around. And so when we think about proprioception for function, the first thing I think about is mobility and agility. So as Dr. Emily talks about, kind of that ground up approach. And so you've got to get people to start becoming aware of their joints and the somatic sensation, so joint angle and the pressures that they're feeling. One of the things that we do when we have people that we feel like have poor proprioception is we will do a lot of work in which they are changing their direction and center of gravity. So they're kind of doing these multiplanar, you could call them lunges if you want. We will also just do kind of steps in different directions using changing their center of gravity and having to control their center of gravity through space. And so that might actually start with just standing and doing weight shifting in different directions, and they're having to kind of feel that weight shifting under their feet, and then we move to more dynamic movements from that. In addition, we will have them do some kind of motor control exercise to improve proprioception as well. So if you're doing tapping exercises like on a bench, well, we get very visually dependent. And so the more that you can remove their vision from an activity so they can't see their feet, then the more they're going to have to rely on their proprioception. And so you might have them doing, bench taps in multiple directions, but you don't let them look down at their feet. Even in walking, in gait exercises, don't let them look down at their feet, and even give them something that blocks or obstructs their vision, such as we'll just even use a laundry basket that's empty, or one of those foam pads just to carry so they can't see their feet, and that takes kind of the visual cueing away. They can't see where their feet are going, and so they're having to rely more on proprioception. And then using varied surfaces, so having them step on and off of different surfaces that would include inclined and declined surfaces. A lot of times it's very interesting when you look at somebody's proprioception at the ankle. They'll be fine on flat ground, and then you put them on an inclined surface just to stand, and they can't do it. They can't maintain that position. And so that cues you in. All right, they've got some proprioceptive challenges that are going on at the ankle because they can't sense that angle appropriately. So we might work on that in multiple planes to different degrees as well.
Okay, great answer. So another question, what nutritional assessment and guidelines do you use, if you do use them?
Right now, we, at least in our facility, use very little nutritional assessment, and we provide some guidelines, as I mentioned before, related to healthy eating. We do have some weight loss programs that we will use, and it's because we also have a younger population, but we will get older adults who need or are very interested in weight loss also. So those are the ones we typically intervene with, is really for the weight loss aspect of it. We don't necessarily provide nutritional advice when it comes to health conditions. We have a lot of great resources actually in our community that we've built relationships with. So we refer people to those resources more than doing it in-house. When we first started our program, we had a registered dietitian who worked with us, and she was also a trainer. And as many facilities kind of go through this, they realize, wow, there's, at least in our situation, it was very tough to get people to engage them in nutritional counseling and services and programs. And so we've kind of shifted a little bit on that. And so now we're a little bit more hands-off when it comes to nutritional assessment. We just don't do a lot about it.
Okay. We have one more question. It says, do you use any validated screening tools or standardized measures to help you determine the best exercises to improve mobility and function in your clients?
Oh gosh, this is a big, big question. Well, the answer is a resounding yes, absolutely. And that's what I train everybody to do, is to use validated assessments that are functional in nature. Unfortunately, what you classify as a functional assessment, well, some I'm going to say are more functional than others. So in the research, like I mentioned, gait speed and chair stand time, well, those are considered functional measurements, although it's a little piece of the pie. So what we do is we do kind of a well-rounded functional assessment battery, but it's individualized to the person. So it's not that everybody goes through the same thing. Because you can have a 60-year-old who's on that elite athlete track, and you can have a 60-year-old who's frail, right? Those, you're not going to give them the same assessment because a lot of assessments have floor or ceiling effects, meaning somebody can max it out, if they're too fit, or hit the floor if they're too frail. So we will use things like the 8-foot up and go for dynamic ability or for agility. We'll do the 30-second chair stand, the modified clinical test of sensory interaction and balance, which is a specific balance test. That's a field test that we really like to use. And we use that one specifically to see if people have vestibular issues that are impairing their balance. We use the Berg balance scale or the Fullerton advanced balance scale. We do a postural assessment on a lot of folks. A lot of people just don't even realize how poor their posture is, and that's affecting their function. We had, just really quickly, we had one lady, this was just so interesting. Dan did an assessment on her and told her, well, your left shoulder is drooping about 2 inches lower than your right. She was like, huh? What? No, really, it's visibly 2 inches lower than your right. And we put them in front of a posture grid and assess it and stuff. But we take a picture of them. We showed her a picture, and she was like, I can't believe that. I've never noticed that before. And she said she went home, walked in the door to her husband and said, look at me. What do you see about my shoulders? And he immediately said, well, your left shoulder is 2 inches lower than your right. So then she went and looked at all her family pictures, and she finally saw it, right? She had never seen it before. And so she took steps to correct it, and we helped her with that. But I thought that was just so funny. People often don't see themselves like we see them. But we do well-rounded assessments. We'll also do, kind of some standards, height, weight, body comp, blood pressure, those sorts of things. But it's really individualized to the person. And so, again, part of the functional aging specialist certification teaches you a lot of these validated assessments that we prefer and that we like and that we've used, but also goes into talking about some others because there are some, depending on your situation, you may need a few more tools in your toolbox when it comes to assessment, but it is extremely important. And if you have a situation that allows you to do assessment, then you really need to, and then do it periodically to show change over time.
Okay, great. Excellent. So thank you again, Dr. Sipe, for this incredible webinar. If you want to give your email one last time, just so people can take that down.
Okay. It is Senior Fit Solutions. So it's SR Fit, F-I-T, Solutions, with an S on the end, at yahoo.com.
Excellent. So thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Please remember that all EBFA webinars are archived. So just in case you want to listen to this webinar again or any of our previous webinars, there's probably over 20 of them on our YouTube channel. It is youtube.com/EBFA Fitness. If you're looking to learn more about barefoot science, gait assessment, and the from the ground up programming that we offer at EBFA, please check out our website, ebfafitness.com. And then we have another great webinar next month, which will be with myself, and I will be talking about barefoot training for athletes who have to be shod. So kind of how you get that crossover and how it's very important for them to still activate barefoot. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Dr. Sipe.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful night.